cheese making is a 100% natural craft, and it goes all the way back to the heritage roots of old world cheese making. We said, okay, well, we want to respect those old world recipes, and we want to build on them with a New Zealand twist and a New Zealand element that's going to give us our own unique flavour profile.
Welcome back to another episode of a Kiwi Original. Today on the show, I have Simon Berry from Whitestone Cheese, the good stuff. This is the delicious stuff that we all love to enjoy as Kiwis. So we're going to be talking about food, deliciousness and cheese, and also maybe peer a little bit into the backstory of what Whitestone Cheese is all about, where the company came from, and just get a bit of a background, because you've probably seen these cheeses every time you go to the supermarket. They're everywhere. So first thing to say, Simon, is welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Pleased to be here.
Now, you're virtually here from Oamaru, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So I'm sitting here in my living room in Oamaru on isolation and lockdown, and running our site remotely, really. Yeah.
What's it like living in and working in Oamaru for the likes of us that are living in Auckland or Wellington and in city life? What's the difference of, coming to work every day in a town like Oamaru?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I have lived in the larger centres. I've lived in Auckland and different parts of the world, but living in Oamaru is just a breath of fresh air. When I first got back, I realised, after living, in these bigger centres, that the change was drastic. But it took a while. But after a while, you get used to the rhythm and the pace of life in a small town. It's a 4-minute commute for me to work. So I get up, I leave at 8:30 and I'm at work literally at 8:34. So there's just you're really directly connected to your community as well, in the sense that not only does it not take long to get around, but you're also you're seeing people around town that you see either day to day in your workplace or as your neighbours and so on. You're seeing people really regularly, so it's a great little community, to enjoy and live in, and really enjoy it.
Outside of Whitestone Cheese, what else is in Oamaru? When people go there, what's it generally like in terms of business?
In terms of business, look, we've got a great little community that it did have a thriving tourism sector, but we've got a community that is really a big foodie base. We're driven by agriculture in the back end. We've got a large irrigation scheme now that's driven a great dairy industry. We've got high country farmers. We've got, a large outdoor component as well when you head up towards the mountains. And then the coast, of course, we've got a small working fishing port that's got about 3 or 4 boats commercially fishing out of it, and then all the coastline. So, look, it's got a huge variety within a very small microclimate in that sense.
And in terms of Whitestone Cheese, how much does it matter of where you're located? Like, what's the ecosystem around what you do and who you depend on?
Yeah, well, our key ingredient is the raw milk that comes locally, and we wouldn't have such world-class milk if we didn't have such a lovely environment for our cows and grass to grow and thrive in. So that's, I guess, the base building blocks for us, is that we've got this fantastic milk on our doorstep, and to arrive at that, we need a lovely clean environment, good practice on the farm, good dairy farmers, and good irrigation, so they're not under pressure for growing grass. So that's the first foundation block, and then we've got a great local community in terms of workforce, and we've built up a highly skilled workforce now of cheesemakers and packers, and all that side of the operation has really developed into a world-class workforce as well as raw materials. So it's a combination of those things. We've got, as far as like cost of living in Oamaru is relatively low. People don't have huge mortgages like larger centres. And we also, on the freight, getting product to market, we have freight benefits because the majority of the freight's coming south. So we get what's called backloading rates heading north.
That's
the trucks are easy. Yeah. So there's some real efficiencies when it comes through to distribution out of Oamaru. The distribution network's efficient. We don't have problems with trucks turning up that are full. The trucks are pleased to have our business to be getting our products travelling north. So, yeah, it's a great niche to operate in. The advent of all this digital technology is just fallen onto our laps. And, we've employed a national sales manager now in Auckland, and I don't need to be on the plane like I was once a month, up visiting our key markets and building those relationships. So, things have got to a lovely scale for us now. We've got about 75 employees on the books, and about 50 of those are in Oamaru.
Now, I've been down to visit your factory, and it's right on the coast. Like, it's right next to the sea. It's almost like a beachfront $1 million property, except here's this high-tech innovation hub making cheese. And I remember when you took me through it, it took quite a bit of time to actually just enter your factory because of all the health and the hygiene standards. And just it reminded me actually when you said the quality of the milk. Talk us through the process of actually making cheese from when the milk arrives, when you showed me upstairs, and then how does it go from that through the Whitestone factory and actually come out the other end and look like cheese?
Yeah, okay. So when it arrives, it's coming by a tanker straight from the farm, and it's raw. So it's been milked that morning, and when it turns up, we get milk deliveries mid-morning, and they come straight from the cow, straight into our silos, and it'll sit overnight chilled. And then in the morning, when the boys arrive at 5:30 in the morning, they flick on the pasteuriser. So we pasteurise it in. All our milk's pasteurised. That's providing us a export grade raw material in the sense that we've killed all the bugs. Into the vats it goes, and each vat's about 2,000 litres, which produces about 200 kilos in a batch. And we then add starter cultures, so we're adding the good bacteria in there that's been killed by the pasteurisation, and we're controlling what starter cultures we put in there to give us the natural flavours. So we're adding natural bacteria, and then we apply a bit of heat. We set it at about 35 degrees in the vat, and then we also add rennet. So rennet's the enzyme, which is the key ingredient that formulates or coagulates it into milk and solids, or water and solids, so curds and whey. So once that rennet's added, it's then left to set and prime, and then we cut it. And once it's cut, it's cut with a fine catgut, like if you imagine like a tennis racket's passed through the vat, and that cuts it into a cube. And then we stir it, and the more we stir it, the more whey is expelled from those solids, and we end up draining the whey off, and then those curds are formed into a hoop, and depending on what hoop or what application we apply after that depends what type of cheese we're making. So a white mould cheese, for example, a brie or a camembert, it goes into a hoop that's about 1 kilo, and then the gravity just lets those curds knit together, it's called. So they press by gravity together to form a cheese, and then they're left for 24 hours like that, and then we add some salt. And the salt's a natural brine, a liquid salt, and then it goes into maturation room for 12 days, and it grows white mould, which is also added in the vat, and then you've got yourself a brie or a camembert. So depending after that vat run, and the starter cultures are different for each cheese. We make a blue cheese, what we call the white moulds, which are the brie and cams. Then we go on to pressed and semi-softs. Feeders and fresh. So we've got a cheese press, and then we've got another whole technique around the blue side of making. But it all falls back to cheese making is a 100% natural craft, and it goes all the way back to the heritage roots of old world cheese making that we respect in the sense that we're not adding any emulsifiers or preservatives. It's nature. All those ingredients are 100% natural.
What difference do you get in terms of flavor profile by going down that avenue of being true to the origins of some of these styles versus what maybe you could have done if you had decided to go down the emulsifier additive and get a bit more shelf life? What's the trade-offs in the cheese business that you make?
Yeah, firstly is shelf life. The retailers or the market demands might want a processed cheese that lasts six months or a year or 2 years or even 5 years. Emulsifiers were brought about in the days of the war, and they were like, right, well, we need to have a cheese snack that's high in protein, it's got good fats in there, and we want it in a gel pack that we can give to our soldiers, and it might need to be shipped to some foreign land, unrefrigerated, and sitting in a container and feed the troops. So market demands can dictate or determine what you're trying to achieve. From our perspective, we've developed a lot of our flavors and recipes from what's called the Old World, which is Europe and Middle East. And those recipes of halloumi or fetas and things like that, well, they date back to the real traditions, and they were made out of necessity of storage of milk, essentially. So when we've looked at it, we've said, okay, well, we want to respect those old world recipes, and we want to build on them with a New Zealand twist and a New Zealand element that's going to give us our own unique flavour profile. And we're actually developing it further the way that we see fit for our market here in New Zealand. So, plus we're working with different ingredients on our doorstep, and we want to enhance the flavours the best we can out of our milk and our milk styles and our grasses here in New Zealand. So, yeah, it's a combination of understanding what the market is demanding or requiring, working with our raw materials, and getting something in between all of that tastes unique and special to us. We've always looked at our recipes and said, well, how are we going to make that with a Whitestone flavour or Whitestone style, and what twist are we going to put on it so that it does stack up as a unique cheese to New Zealand. And then when we go and enter international competitions, we get that, we get recognised for that. Like, what are they doing down there in the New World? It's a bit like the New World of wine. A Pinot Noir from Central Otago, when stacked up against one from the south of France, is always going to taste a little bit different. We're just the same with cheese. We've got all these different raw materials on our doorstep, but we're not replicating, but we're doing what the old world has established, and then we're saying, hey, this is the new world version.
Okay, so let's go a little bit deeper on that then with, let's say, blue cheese, because you've got 2 or 3 different types of blue cheese on the market as Whitestone. How do they compare to the old world, and why do you decide that you need a second or a third blue cheese when you've already got one? What are all the kind of different things you have to consider there?
Yeah, so when we first embarked on the blue cheese development, I guess on that journey, we looked at our raw materials and said, well, the blue cheese, the blue mould itself is come from the old world and it's commercially available, but we said, well, we want to be different. So we actually worked with a microbiologist, and we developed naturally through process of elimination a different strain of blue mould that had a sweet finish, and we got a series of blue moulds to try. I think we got about 6 different variants, and we was like, okay, well, which one do we want? We put it in cheese, and we tried all of them, and then we said, hey, hang on, that one there, that's got a sweet finish, the others didn't, and that became our Windsor blue mould. So we said, right, well, that's a new variant on a natural take on the original strain. We've got a new strain because as blue mould grows, it naturally deviates from its source point. It's a bit like you imagine a cherry tree, and you're plucking all these cherries. Well, we had 6 cherries plucked from the master tree, and each one of those cherries just had deviated a bit from its master. So we've now got that first cherry, and we replicate that with Windsor blue. Then we said, okay, what's the blue market and what's in demand in New Zealand? And we said people aren't really used to a super strong blue here, so we want to develop a blue that's very palatable and is what we call like the converter's blue. So it's the introductory one.
The converter's blue, I like that.
Yeah. So we've got the sweet blue mould itself. It's not too tart. It's not too overpowering. Let's combine that with a high cream recipe, high fat, that'll give it velvet, soft and smooth texture, and then make it quite high in moisture. So it's smooth and buttery. It's quite creamy. So we combined all those elements along with a bit of salt and said, yeah, now that blue there is not too overpowering for our market. And it's gone that way. It's really popular. So that's how we develop the blue, and that's one example of how when we develop a cheese, we listen to the market, we listen to look at our raw materials, and then say, look, let's put that together to make this work and make it sing. So then we've done that with all our other variants of blue cheese. Highland blue is Windsor blue recipe minus the cream, so it's a lower fat one, different, bit of a high flavour, but we can still make it with all our gear on hand. Meraki Bay blue is just a smaller hoop. It makes a smaller round, and those dimension dynamics kick in, and we get a different flavoured cheese. And then we've got the Shenley Station story of finding our own blue mould in a hay bale, and that's another strain again that's come out of here, and we've developed that cheese in a way that is palatable to the New Zealand market also.
I think that last story, I think that's my favourite story, because I mean, who goes looking for a mould for a cheese? And everyone, or a lot of people at least, who understand good food and good wine will know Roquefort cheese. But you had a different approach on it, didn't you? There was a, maybe do you want to share the story behind?
Yeah, it was that cheesemaker Chris originally came up with the concept, because he understood we're talking about developing blue moulds, and he understand the concept that we were here in the New World and we're in a limestone country, and where the home of blue mould is, Roquefort in the south of France, is in a limestone country also. And the name Whitestone reflects the limestone grass, and it gives us these flavours. And then in the south of France, there's a limestone area as well. So anyway, the Roquefort story was that that a sandwich was placed by a shepherd with cheese in a limestone cave, and it grew blue mould from the cave. So we said, Chris, our cheesemaker, said, I wonder if we could have a look at a cave here. And he sort of came to me, and I was like, you're right, there might be something here. It's worth a crack. I don't know if we'll find anything, but we'll give it a nudge.
So you took him seriously.
Yeah. We were like, well, it made sense, and I've been to the Roquefort caves and seen in there and where they store the cheese and so on. So I was like, righto, let's go give it a go. So we end up like knocking on farmers' doors and saying, hey, you got a cave? And it was getting a lot of harebrained looks. And the farmers, though, when they picked up what we were doing, they were like, oh, that's really interesting. And so we swabbed, I don't know, must be 20 sites sort of thing. Didn't find anything. We found some, because you take a cotton bud in there and swab a cave and then put it in a tube and send it to a lab. But we did come across some rogue wild yeasts, which we could use further down the line. And then we gave up and thought, that was about 6 months or so. We did it every few weekends. And then the lab in Christchurch, Plant Logistics, they were great. And they were like, right, well, they knew what we're doing. They said, look, we'll keep an eye out, because sometimes we do get Penicillium roquefortis, which is what we're seeking, across the table. And we're like, righto. We then learned more that we were actually barking up the wrong tree. The mould didn't come from a cave. It came from rye bread. It came from the rye in the bread of the sandwich of the shepherd. So the mould actually came from rye, from that source, which we since learned is a high alkaline environment. So then a hay bale gets opened in Fairlie, and it's biodynamic. It's got no sprays applied, and it's oats, oat, rye bread, and it's got oats. And he's found all the sweet mould in it, and he was nervous about feeding it to his in-calf heifers. So he sent a sample to our mates at Plant Logistics, and they tested it and found it was clear for toxins, but positive for Penicillium roqueforti, which is what we're looking for. And hey presto, we found our New Zealand version.
Isn't that fascinating that someone else's problem is actually the start of your product innovation?
Yeah, that's right. It's an opportunity for us. And the lab rang the farmer, Rit, and said, mate, we found this, your hay's clear, but we found this other strain of stuff in your hay. He's like, well, can I feed that? Feed the cows the bloody feed? And he goes, that's fine, but do you mind if we share the find with a third party? And he's like, what's all this about? And then once he picked up on the concept, he was fascinated too, and we welcomed him into the project, and we still supply them cheese and keep in touch with Rit and Sarah up there at Shenley Station. And it's been a great relationship, but it just shows too a bit of that Kiwi ingenuity and that attitude of, hey, let's give this a crack. And we do need to see so much more of that coming out now with these current economic times. We've got to give it a crack, and we've got to stand on our own 2 feet. We can't just replicate other things or look to the world globally for supplies. These times have really come through that we need to fall back to those roots of what founded our country.
I think you're right. I was saying that to Andy Hamilton from Icehouse on episode 7, saying that given the current climate, as a business, don't necessarily be super fixed on the products and services. Go back a step and say, what are the assets you've got? What are the competencies? What are the boundaries of your industry or regulation or perceived boundaries? And then what's the narrative? What's the story you're telling yourself and telling your customers and suppliers? And maybe if you can use those three like a lens to actually change what you do without having to change your business a whole amount. I've seen ones come through on Twitter and LinkedIn, a company that couldn't trade, but is now doing essential services, and they're not only portable desks, but stand-up walls. So to protect frontline workers, and they've stood that up in 2 weeks.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, high-end innovation, and but coming back to that regulation point, that's going to be a big constraint going forward. We've really got all this compliance, and are we going to see? Can we sidestep that for a few years to rebuild? Do we need to look at those rules and regulations that do restrict us? Like, we've got so safe in the world now that that's one of the hard things to do if you're going to. Like, we can't bring ingredients into our factory that we want to develop all these new cheeses because that ticks the allergen box. You've got to change this with all your packaging and all your processes, and all these other audits kick in. And, that's one of the major constraints I see going forward is all this compliance that we're really tripping ourselves up with is going to be such a constraint, and we've got to work within those parameters. But if those parameters could be opened up for a bit, I think we'd be seeing some, significant areas of development. But yeah, I mean, we're really going to have to push hard to keep innovating, keep adding value is the other thing, like where are the gaps in the market? The market's just rapidly changing at the moment in terms of distribution, and we're seeing in the food chain, huge moves of different mechanics getting product to market, and that's domestically. It's going to be very interesting over the next few years because we'll see that shift back to nationalism in terms of supporting the local guys and what those local guys can do. Yeah.
And you're probably one of a few of the food and beverage producers in New Zealand who are seeing what that shift looks like quite early, because you're in food and beverage, so you're seeing the what supermarkets, the data they're providing, the sales they're providing. I know Peter Cox from Harrowways was saying their year on year for March was up 50%.
Yeah, right.
What are you seeing in terms of cheese? Are you seeing that consumer preference switch back to NZ made yet, or is it purely just a demand as people are stocking up rather than going out?
Yeah, well, we've seen a few shifts. Firstly, the food service aspect with this lockdown period has just been knocked on the head. So that was about 40% of our throughput was food service. So that whole sector of restaurants, hotels, that's just been ground immediately to a halt. So there's been that's been something that we've looked at and gone, how are we going to replace that? And is the demand immediately going to be there? And then in the retail, we saw a huge stock up surge, but now we've moved. We're sitting here, I guess, what are we? Day 12, I think, of the lockdown today. And now everyone's stocked up with their fridges, and when they are going to the stores, we're getting some stats back from the retailers that people are just buying the essentials in terms of commodity lines of bread, milk, and cheese, and really the simple lines, probably because they want to get in and out of the store quite quickly. But what's happened in the food service market is a lot of those distributors who were delivering all to the restaurants, well, they've acted really agile, and they've set up their own online delivery food businesses. So they're saying we've got a truck network here. We can deliver food straight to households. So suddenly those guys are saying, righto, well, what retail lines can you supply us? Or they might even be offering food service lines in terms of, larger items that would go into a restaurant are now being available to the retail consumer and being delivered to their door. So, yeah, that side of things, the landscape's changing very quickly in terms of how we're getting product through to consumers nationally, and I think that's going to be another space that is going to rapidly change as we move into this post-COVID world. The landscape in terms of home delivery is really going to lift and be competitive.
Yeah, I think the technology's been there for 20 years, and early adopters looked at technology as a way of disrupting incumbents, whereas now it's almost like a forced. If you hadn't bought online yet, now you have to. Or you can risk, going to the supermarket. We want you to stay at home. If you can order online, great. And I think some people find it far easier than they ever imagined and won't switch back.
Yeah, well, that's right. You'll get learned behaviours. You'll get switching count going over. Oh, yeah, no, I get my green grocer now. He delivers me once a week. And, and that's right. It's come out of necessity. So it's going to be very interesting, too, in that sense of, the cost models as well. Like, where are the margins going to go? Are those distribution networks going to sell things still at wholesale like they did it to restaurateurs? They add on their delivery charge, and then suddenly the good old retail consumers got access to wholesale price goods. They might be, buying 5 kg bags of chicken nuggets, chicken nuggets. They go, hey, and then everyone might start stocking up on the big old chest freezers, and we're back to the days of, the fortnightly delivery.
Well, then it creates these other questions in my mind, which is, when I go to More Wilson's in Wellington and there's someone there with Whitestone Cheese saying, would you like to try this new, I think there was a goat's milk one. And I'm not a huge fan of the goat's milk cheese in general, but I get introduced to it and it's not as goaty as I was expecting. I was like, actually, this is pretty nice. I'll grab some. How do you do that in a world where people are just ordering what they know? So you've got let's say you've got an amazing new product. How do you get it into people's taste buds when you don't have that floor representative being able to say, try this?
Well, that's a challenge. Do we just throw a free sample pack in with the online delivery of a new cheese? And give us your feedback and order it next time, it's but the interaction is gone. Like, well, it's not. It's just going to be not at the same scale. And we've always respected our demo. We did demo program in supermarkets, and we were doing them every week of it. Just even our current stocks, come on, have you tried Windsor Blue? It's still introducing it to the market, and that's going to be a challenge for anyone in FMCG about how to get it out there. So. Yeah, I think the supermarket network is still going to be there. It's just I don't think it's going to be at the same scale. Particularly if we might have restrictions on numbers in the store for up to 18 months. Like 18 months that you're only allowed 100 people in a store or something, or one in, one out. Well, we're never going to see the same behaviour in all those stores. It's quite daunting when you start thinking of the shifts in behaviour that we're going to have to learn how to adapt to.
Sorry to interrupt. This won't take long. Subscribe to the show and you'll never miss another one of these amazing episodes. Right, back to the show. I think it's underappreciated. I think what the wine industry has done very well with that cellar door experience. It's not just a tasting, do you like it or not? When you buy that bottle or rebuy it 6 months or a year later, you're actually reliving that good time you had in Martinborough or in Hawke's Bay or wherever. So I think maybe cheese is less affected by that retelling the experience, but there's still an element there.
Yeah. Yeah, like, you can think about, we've always looked at Europe as I guess the established market for cheese, not only in manufacturing and flavours, but also the way in the distribution works. And look, I was at France just a few years ago, and their farmers' markets were key to every community in small town France. So you go into these villages, it might be a town the size of, say, Timaru, 40,000 people. Well, in the middle of that town is a significant 7-day market, and you've got your fishmonger, you've got your cheesemonger, you've got your fruit stall, all of that, and it's established. And those guys are working in there, and the supermarkets aren't everywhere. It's not like you've got a supermarket at every sort of third block. You've got one big market in the middle, and it's fresh, and it's a community centre, and people are going in there and chit-chatting away. It might necessarily be the fishermen, but the fishmonger's there, but it's a real community hub. You look at that model now about how that's been disrupted, and you think, well, those guys eventually are going to get through this, but those markets will soon fire back up. And I think we'll see the same with supermarkets. It's not going to be the end of that model. It's just going to be different. It's just going to be really different, that the way that FMCG is going to work.
I think there'll be those two models. There'll be the experience model, which is optimized for the best experience when you taste and purchase. And then you'll have those which is just optimized for supply chain procurement, repurchasing, where you don't even need to talk to a human or see one. You just want cheese on your plate that night.
Yeah, well, it's a bit like your more Wilsons now versus, say, a New World experience or Countdown experience. Your more Wilsons, you've got someone there talking to you about the product, and they're cutting and wrapping it, and then you've got that interaction, and it takes sort of 5 minutes to make a purchase. Versus New World, you pick up a cheese off the shelf, and you're relying on the packaging to tell you the story. So, yeah, but that might be more, like you say, how do you make that more experiential without, I mean, we've got a salad door here in Oamaru, but, do we see emergence of people giving those experiences in towns and cities? And, yeah, like that's how we've viewed farmers markets like that. We've got our own farmers market stalls in Auckland and Queenstown, and we've got the people there highly trained with highly knowledgeable on our products so that they get an experience when you go to the farmers market. That's the Whitestone experience, So, yeah. Oh, well, it's going to be very interesting. Just as we move through this, we'll see spikes and things go on as we go along. But it'd be nice to get through it, and hopefully the economy bounces back in the sense that we've got enough money floating around the place or coming in so people can afford to live a lifestyle that we're used to.
And I think that that's an interesting point, is around the broader economic times that we live in, and certainly this isn't the first time that some of us have been through a recession or something worse. In fact, I think I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, isn't that part of Whitestone Cheese's the origin story? If it wasn't for an economic downturn, you wouldn't have even got into cheese in the first place.
Yeah, that's right. It was in 1987 we started things, and that was through a year of crippling droughts, and it was out of necessity to have an income subsidy to our farm to survive. And exactly right, out of hard times, we can see necessity sort of developments occur, and there's a whole series of businesses in North Otago here that started back in 87, and now they're well-established, mature businesses. So, yeah, who knows what's going to come out of this, like you're saying. Are we going to see innovation kick in, and we're going to see some birth of some new industries? We've got to replace this tourism dollar somehow, and that's a major, and out of necessity of that, we're going to see some good thinking and some good think tanks, and who knows what industries are going to be born out of this. It's going to be very interesting. And like you were saying, we've got to look at our natural environment, our resources, our parameters. What are our assets we've got to work with? What have we got on our doorstep that others don't? What's our competitive advantage, and how do we put all that together? Or what haven't we done that other markets have done that we can now step into and say, okay, now it's New Zealand's turn to do this. You could say the same. Different industries looking at film and where to workshop and stuff. Are we going to become the Hollywood of the South Pacific? We've got all these great landscapes to film in. Do we set up, world-class film studios here, and we develop that industry? It's exportable. It's easily manufactured here and developed here, and we can get the actors here and so on, and we just need to fly the stars out in a private jet, and away we go, I think this is where we're going to need some real leadership and direction in that space of replacing that tourism dollar, because it's not going to be the same as what it was.
I completely agree, and I think it's a big opportunity for businesses and people in general to think differently, because when you've got something to protect, it's very easy to just say, well, let's just do 10% more or 20% more next year. When you've got nothing to protect, now you can start thinking about, well, what would 10 times where we are now or 100 times where we are look like? Because the amount of thinking is exactly the same. But because there's no downside anymore, you start to look beyond what the safe options used to be. And I think a guiding rule set through that should be more value, less volume. So if you've got less volume of tourists, maybe now you've got empty landscapes, so it's more value within film. Or if you've got less volume in tourists, now you've got very high net worth tourists. Yeah. And there's just 1,000 of them or 100,000 of them.
Yep. And they're spending $20,000 when they're here rather than $5,000. And we need to, I guess that comes back to the strategy of making sure that we're targeting those correct high value. I guess that we've come back to that value add thing. It's a bit of a catchphrase, but if you're looking at that value add area, where are we getting the highest value in terms of tourist spend, in terms of industries. We don't want to get into industries where it's high volume, low margin stuff. We want to get into industries where there is good high value products coming out the end. And you might look at film, there's good margins. Is there good margins in film? Is that where the margin has it, or is the margins in film used to be in distribution, but now that's changed. Should we be developing a new online platforms and, really some strong thinking around how we can actually increase the value with what we've got. And you look at our landscape and you look at our raw materials here, we're still a little island in the South Pacific that's pretty much untouched pollution-wise and, natural landscape-wise, and they're pretty powerful assets. We've had, there was a guy from Avatar, James Cameron, come out,
yes.
And he's sat here and gone, oh my God, this is just a big film set. And, there's that aspect that what else can those beautiful scenic locations provide us in terms of industries that we've got on our doorstep? Maybe it is into the high-end tourism market where people are going up and staying in little lodges up in mountains. That's another one,
Eating high-end cheese, of course.
Eating high-end cheese, sitting there in their bunkers and, shooting their own venison, to become a wild hunting park. And, those guys, do we, make it a minimum charge of $5,000 a stag or something? I don't know what they pay, but you could, it's another market we could develop, and we could have high-end country blocks and within dockland and so on that's eco and sensitive to the environment, but achieving high returns.
I mean, it's a lot to consider, and I think some of that there's some question marks over. Does that go against the the Kiwi way of life of being inclusive and letting everyone in? So there's lots to debate in that. On the cheese side of it, and for food and beverage in general, because there's a lot of NZ made license holders that have joined only in the last couple of years, so they don't have the same 30 plus years of trading that Whitestone Cheese has got. What if you do have any advice? What advice would you give to a very young food and beverage business who wasn't expecting 2020 to go this way? What should they be thinking about and doing to keep their operation shipshape?
Focus on the domestic market would be first advice, and don't underestimate the domestic market. And we've had when we started, it was all about export and growing markets internationally, and we had a significant strategic shift towards focus on domestic market. And now we've found this situation in 2020 that we wouldn't be where we are today without that strategy. And the domestic market itself is going to be a key to longevity and survival through not only this but ongoing. And I think the big shiny export markets are always the hardest, but they're very shiny. But focus on the domestic market because it is still significant. We've got 5 million consumers in the country, and if things were starting out fresh, that would be my first advice. And then second, make sure you've got a really good, source of supply that is you're harnessing those attributes really well. One example might be a good supply of fruit or peanut butters or whatever. That make sure that's domestic and you're harnessing those key attributes of that natural environment. Because with food and bev, it's all about not only sustainability but reliability of supply, and that people know where it's come from. They don't want to buy something that's got an imported ingredient in it anymore. I think that's very important. That's if you've been a New Zealand one, stay true to New Zealand. And I think there's some major opportunities when you're looking across the sectors in food and bev. We're only seeing the beginnings of like the gin industry. Craft beer's been down that line, but now you're looking at gins, and those guys are setting up those stills. They've got so much potential because they might have whiskies aging in the background, but meanwhile they've got gins flowing out the front. And then we haven't seen the full natural botanicals come through. Like, where's the New Zealand botanicals that we're putting in there? And there's this whole potential there of saying, oh gee, this gin's, it's got some manuka, and I think one I saw had gorse in it, New Zealand,
Wow.
Yeah, and you're like, they're going on foraging missions around New Zealand to find these botanicals to put into their gins. And that's one example of a great way that we've said, okay, well, we know how to make gin. That's a world proven, But here we are putting our New Zealand twist on it. It's made with New Zealand ingredients, 100%. It's high end, and boy, it tastes good because it's clean. And the 42 Below vodka story could be told the very same way. What those guys achieved with New Zealand attributes on the world stage. But if you're going to start out, stick with New Zealand market, stick with the Buy New Zealand made, because they're going to be the first ones to support you and saying, hey, this is the New Zealand stuff, and it tastes pretty good. And I guess that's the other core thing, would be make sure that your core competency is quality. It does taste good. Because if you can just think you go out and market everything and go on the back of our Buy New Zealand made image or Buy New Zealand made attributes, make sure your product stacks up too. There'd be nothing worse than seeing a Buy New Zealand made something and it's like, it's a bit average. You got to stick to that world-class standard if you can, and say, you've got to think when we're making it and developing it, how's this going to stack up on the international stage? It might taste good compared to other stuff locally, but if we stuck it on in a world competition, does it stack up? And that's the other thing, is compare yourself to the world markets and saying, well, how does it stack up when you taste these products against what is out there in the world being produced, and does it really stack up and be as good as they are, if not better? Then go for it. But that's the sort of standard you should be working at, because if they can achieve it, why can't we? Yeah.
That's some great insight there. I think anyone listening from food and beverage have just heard some superb insight from Simon at Whitestone Cheese on how to get through these times, but also just how to think about your product set, thinking about the quality of the product, representative of your brand, but also representative of brand New Zealand. And on that, Simon, you haven't always been in the Whitestone Cheese business in Oamaru, have you? You've spent quite a bit of time overseas. How many years has it been now since you were back?
Yeah, I got back in 2002, so was it early 2003? So that's when I got back to Oamaru and working full time for the family business. And we had, I think I was about staff number 10 back then, and we were very small. But it takes a long time to develop things, and we've had a real policy of just reinvesting and investing in the company and thinking of the long-term gain, the long-term strategy, and not short-term wins. But I got back then, and before that I'd worked and travelled, worked in London and worked for multinationals in the finance sector, worked in Vancouver, worked in Auckland for a couple of years up there in the music industry, but I was the financial accountant for a firm, and learned a huge amount, not only about the music industry and that entertainment sector, but living in Auckland and understanding the New Zealand market. When it came to food and bev, I was always finger on the pulse with what's going on in the factory back here, how we were developing things and so on. So, I think that's core to our skill base in New Zealand as well, is that a lot of people go away and do the OE, and hopefully we still get to have that with our younger generation coming through, that they can be able to go and experience and see the wide world of multinationals and see what goes on out there, and come back and apply those skills to the New Zealand market, because it is key. We've got to operate at an international level, even though we're supplying domestic. We've got to think that way of what's going on in the big wide world, and it's very important that people get exposed to that for our economy. And it's going to be sad if we're all going to be locked in our New Zealand pens for a decade or something like that. You don't know, do you? It's kind of scary.
Well, I'm hoping that there is some way that you can travel where maybe there's a passport equivalent that shows the antibodies you are carrying, or something that says I'm not a risk, or I don't have it, or I've had it, so I can't get it again. Something that opens up the ability to travel, because I know, just from a personal perspective, living in London for 8 years gave me the experience of, okay, this is what scale is like, this is what volume is like, and this is also what you have to compromise on in terms of quality to get that scale and volume, because it's not always, you can't always do quality at hundreds of millions of people levels. So, but I think it's every Kiwi should be able to at least have that right to go over and see the differences, because we all come back fuller, rounder, richer people because of it.
Yeah, that's right. And you did right, and you can see where you don't want to go with those scale things, But coming back to that, I think that the next challenge to get those people, or to enable that travel again is that I guess the airlines to be back in that affordable space. Like they're going to have to rebuild the freight channels and rebuild the routes again and make them profitable and so on. And that I think is going to be the challenge there. When is it going to be as accessible for as many people?
I think it will be. We're smart, diverse, and we love socializing. We love travel as a species. I think it'll move back to more like backbone networks, where maybe there's a hub in Singapore and then you fast train around, or there's a hub in Tokyo and a hub in London and Shanghai, and everything else just happens on rail. So it's almost like those short hops around Europe by plane, but now it's by train.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, should we be putting a bullet train into Sydney, dig a hole and whack a train in over there, and then you're into the network? And yeah, that'd be a BHAG goal for the government. Right, we're putting in the bullet train and we go and put 10,000 people to work on that.
Wouldn't that be interesting? We've gone completely off topic as usual, Simon. The only difference here is we're not eating cheese because we're virtual. Just to bring it back before we sum up, where can Kiwis buy Whitestone cheese? I know they're in the supermarkets, but what are some of the other channels that deserve some support at the moment, or that maybe they're not aware of?
Yeah, I guess we're in nationwide retail, and then we're in specialty shops, which might be closed at the moment too. Unfortunately, we've really upgraded our online offering from our factory direct site now. So we've got a whole series of options on there in terms of subscription cheeses or subscription packages, as well as one-off orders plus factory clearance stock. So we've really, out of necessity, had to do that because we had a lot of food service stuff that had to get out the door before it became dated. And yeah, but at the moment, to be honest, the way of lockdown, it is only retail. So as we move through these different series, we'll get back into specialty markets and farmers markets in Auckland and so forth. Christchurch, we're in the Riverside market there. We've got some people there, but I imagine that's all closed down at the moment. So yeah, I guess online's the big thing. We're just making it available there, and then supporting all our retailers through and through, and ensuring that we've got good supplies out into the market that way.
How's your team doing through all of this?
Yeah, really interesting. At the start, we were like, everyone's contracted and they've got to turn up. But then there was some real anxiety out there with people who are at risk. So we said, look, this isn't fair. We'll go to everyone and just say, look, who is comfortable coming to work can come to work. The rest of you, if you're feeling not right about it, that's fine. We'll work our way through this together. And we lost about 30% of the team through that, which is fine because things have dropped away now and we've just slowed down. So that's created, we had to do it in terms of goodwill, but it created some real relief of pressure in the atmosphere because people were getting nervous, and some of them had every right to be, that they might have young infants at home or at risk, and or a history of illness or exposure to elderly and things. So yeah, it was a really necessary step, and I think that's one of the challenges that with essential businesses are going through, is finding the staff and the workforce to be able to continue.
And I think that's something that's probably underappreciated. We all know about the supermarket workers who are putting their health and lives out there to support the rest of us Kiwis, making sure we can get fed. But there's all the unseen heroes. It's all the workers in manufacturing who are making the cheese, who are making the drinks, to make sure they actually get to the shelves in the first place. So I just want to say not only thank you to you, Simon, but thank you to your whole team for those that are coming to work and making the delicious cheese for the rest of us to enjoy.
Yeah, thanks, mate. And you did right. All the suppliers that are still stepping up, they're all heroes in our book. And I'm still down at the factory every second day and just keeping down there and making sure that everyone's comfortable and that they're getting on with it. We've got all our teams in cells now, so that they have separate smoko breaks, and they don't even have smokos or lunches together anymore. They stick within their little cell, and that team then goes about their work together, and they know that their bubble extends further out into everyone's personal home. So yeah, they really trust each other, and they've got each other's back in that sense, that they're looking after one another within their teams. So yeah, we've had a really good bonding session out of it as well, which has been good. So we're trying to turn things into a positive as always, and that's one positive that's come out of it. We've had some really good team bonding, and people are really trusting of each other.
It's fantastic what you're doing, and it's a huge ask as well. And usually, as a final question, I'd ask you, for what does the future hold for Whitestone Cheese? But I think at the moment, it's for you, not to put words in your mouth, but it's just staying nimble and flexible to see what happens with market demands and overseas ability to export and keep going. Is that kind of the sum up there?
Yeah, that's right. And look, we're still carrying on with some MPD. We've got some lovely new blue cheeses we're working on. And, we've got some new equipment coming in that's going to enable some new variants that we're going to develop. So we'll still develop our range. But yeah, it's at the moment it's sort of weathering the storm, and then when we come through the other side, we just want to keep producing great high quality products here in New Zealand and focus on the domestic market. We'll take a little bit of export as it comes along, but yeah, we want to keep it local as much as we can, and just provide really good high quality cheeses.
That's awesome, Simon, and appreciate you being on the NZ Made team. We've got 1,200 businesses, and to have a cheese as good as yours is it's superb to be part of. And after this call, I'm going to be getting on the Whitestone Cheese site and checking out some of these clearance cheeses, because I didn't know about those. I know about the online shop, but not the clearance one, so hopefully there's some left there.
Yeah, that's right. The clearance tab's just new, and we actually had to get our heads around it because it really went gangbusters when we first put it together. So, yeah, whitestonecheese.com, get on there.
Thanks very much for your time, Simon. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to hearing from you in less volatile times in a couple of months.
Yeah, cheers, Ryan. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Cheers. This has been a Kiwi original brought to you by the New Zealand Made team. Thanks for watching. The New Zealand Made trademark is used by over 1,200 businesses in New Zealand. The New Zealand Made team licenses that trademark. Check if you're eligible at bynz.org.nz. If you feel that someone should see this, share it with them now. Otherwise, subscribe to youtube.com/bynzmade, and we'll see you on the next episode.